Hello, we're at the lounge by AT&T and Ada's Discovery Cafe. And tonight we're watching another episode of the Chernobyl series by HBO. It is this little event that we're putting on tonight is sponsored by the Friends of Fission of Seattle. My name is Reid Tanaka. I just so happen to be a member of Friends of Fission, and I have a little bit of background in nuclear. And so I'm here tonight also to perhaps answer questions that people might have in nuclear in general, and in Chernobyl specifically. I do have some background in evaluating accidents, as I was part of the American team in the accident response at Fukushima.
Thank you. Good. So, what did you think, Reid?
Well, it's kind of the show is fascinating because there's a lot of elements about that I don't think I was familiar with. Certainly not the question about the water underground that they sent people in the drain and the mining. That's all new territory for me. I would also think that, from the human element, it's pretty dramatic. And so it draws out the issues that the people are having surrounding it. So I think that was very powerful. From a technical side, I have a hard time believing that the Soviets would, as I guess with a lot of film, would just default to a single individual to solve their problem. And I really have a hard time believing that's what they would have done. That they would have gotten all the experts together in this crisis and forced them to come to a table to come up with their own solutions, as opposed to have some professor that they don't even trust to make all these grand decisions. I find that very hard to believe.
So as I understand it, that's pretty much right. Is that it was Legasov and a team of individuals, which is represented by this composite character. So you're absolutely right there. But that's the reality of what's happening, and it's sort of a writing shortcut and a staffing. You have to, a huge number to represent our expert from Kiev, I think. The character's name. That's how it turned out. So is there a good question that we had here? Okay. Chernobyl is a Generation 1 reactor. Really, how safe was that?
I think the world's experts have come together on this particular question and said that it was a really poor design. I think to just look back on it in hindsight, that's a little harsh. And the reason I say that is because at the time that the Soviets came up with this design, they had other compelling issues that we had. For example, they did not have the capability to manufacture good pressure vessels. Everybody could pressure pipes. For part of decision making was to create that pipe for the vessels. We had graphite moderator. That's why you had the pipes for the just like the Western world had a boiling water reactor, and this was very similar in that same concept that they actually boil the water and use that for the steam. There was a number of actual major flaws in this design that we, again, in hindsight, look back and say this was pretty dumb and probably too critical. the fact that they had what we call now as a positive void coefficient, where that if an accident occurs where you have an overheating of a system, you tend to want to have that to shut down, or the reactor to shut down. And that's a requirement effectively in the Western world that we apply to all our reactors, that as the temperature goes up, or as voids go up, we want our reactor shut down. They didn't do that in this particular reactor.
Right, and that's what we saw. This it was the AZ5 button, and they're interrogating the reactor techs and saying, well, why didn't you press this button to scram the reactor? They say, no, we did right before it exploded. And that's what you're referring to in that. Is that the
No, that's actually not.
Okay.
Different.
Right.
That's another important flaw in their system. Is typically our reactors are constructed so that if you push that scram button, so to speak, you get a gravity release and a spring-driven release. Sometimes they go up, like on the boiling water reactors, but the rods go insert by force immediately. In this particular reactor design, they're driven in by servo motors, and so they don't actually drop in with any rapidity. So they run fairly slowly. They're high-speed motors, and that's the design. But again, thinking about that, that's really not very smart. If you have something as rapid as a power excursion, there is no way. Even if the rods function normally, even if they did not have this extra positive reactivity element to it, I still think that it would have been hard to turn the power. And that's the other flaw in this movie, I think, is when they're looking at this, that was a flaw, definitely a flaw in the design, but they're somehow shocked that even after hitting that button, somehow the reactor itself had this massive steam explosion. Well, there's a lot of inertia still in power. And at that point in time, they had no idea what caused the explosion. I mean, I think, again, looking back on it, it was a steam explosion. I think everybody's come to agreement on that. And let's say they did know that it was a steam explosion, but even if you did scram the reactor, and based on the testimony of a couple of individuals, how much time lapsed between that actual operation and the explosion? It could have been seconds, it could have been minutes, it could have been milliseconds. It could have happened at the same time, but their awareness was different. The problem is that you still have all this heat inertia. That's a problem we saw at Fukushima.
So you think that's a little bit of license, and that's a little bit of to sort of like explain to the audience both that this was a design flaw and that they might not have completely understood this flaws, or at least that the reactor techs wouldn't understand that.
Yeah, it did seem to me that's what the movie was trying to come to with a conclusion. That's the conclusion we're going to draw from this movie. But probably, in their actual evaluation, that's not how they came to that decision.
Yeah, it's
a shortcut.
Creative storytelling,
right.
but it is
right.
in a roundabout way, just a shortcut way of expressing that. And sort of maybe one of the other shortcuts in episode 1, this firefighter saw some kind of acute a graphite. So is that real in your judgment, or is there like some kind of radiation source involved in that?
Yeah, I think the specific scene that showed probably is not really possible. That's when they go into this fairly rapid decay of their organs and functions, including their skin.
So with what we know today, I know that you're an expert at the Fukushima Daiichi accident. So do you think that the evacuation could have changed with what we know today?
First of all, I'd like to not call myself an expert in anything. I just happen to be a respondent, so I was pretty deeply involved in the decision making. Evacuation is a tough thing for government to decide. At least during the Fukushima crisis, Chernobyl accident to look back on to help inform that process. And one of the other things that really is rather important in the Fukushima crisis is that this is the government of Japan that was making the decisions. You know, the United States, we were there as advised. We were advising them on what we thought the evacuation should be, and yet it was up to them to make those decisions.
Trying to figure out, shortening this one? Yeah. What episode 2 and a little bit of 3 is showing us that the Soviet response to the Chernobyl disaster is containing disinformation. And I know that especially what you've showed us is that TEPCO and the government of Japan, as opposed to what some conspiracy theories might say, is that at a certain point, they were very open and they published a comprehensive amount of information. So does the difference between that and what we saw here reflect the reality of nuclear policy?
I think we've learned a lot from that, from these accidents that we've had. In the beginning, if you recall, in the Fukushima crisis, there were thousands of people lost. There were thousands of kilometers of destroyed. And so this, I'd say a little, let's not to belittle it, but this nuclear crisis, which eventually took to be in the long-term occurrence. That tsunami and the earthquake really trapped government into their response. And then, unfortunately, also in the industry in Japan at the time, companies to circle the lines. So TEPCO did that. TEPCO has for that, and everybody knows that. experts reside anyway. But they certainly wagons and let very little information. And go, they had very little information because the tsunami got a lot of the communications. And they
have while we spin up the fourth generation reactors.
Well, I think if we're really serious in climate change, we're serious about trying to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere and energy, solves a lot of problems. There's no doubt in my mind should be keeping as long as they're safe. Those are always hard technical evaluations to be made. They certainly should not be shut down just because of politics.
Yeah, that's something I'm really excited about lately is understanding the dynamics of fossil fuel development. I'm still really struck just how much we should be, developing of fossil fuels are such a great opportunity in our current reactors and in the future of nuclear energy. And I'm definitely right there with you. So I think we're going to cut short.